Hello, my dear students. This is your teacher Nazmul Hossain. Do you like reading poem? I enjoy a lot reading both Bangla and English poems. Poem or poetry is a form of literature that uses aesthetic and often rhythmic qualities of language. There are different types of poems in the world literature, such as epic poem, sonnet, ballad, free verse, etc. I am not going to discuss details about the type of poems. Let's today we enjoy a poem from Class 3 English Comprehension book. Our main objective is to enjoy the poem, so Class 3 one-word students can join with me. Let's read the poem named Poetry. Poetry. Poetry is fun. Poetry is sad. Poetry is serious. Poetry is mad. Poetry is mean. Poetry is boring. Poetry is green. Poetry is lonely. Poetry is rounds. Poetry is rhyming. Poetry is sounds. Poetry is laughter. Poetry is tricky. Poetry is perfect. Poetry is picky. Poetry is very old but can be very new. Poetry is all around us and is for you and you and you. How is the poetry? Did you enjoy it? It's a poetry about poetry. The poet of this poetry is anonymous, that means unknown. In this poetry, the poet describes poetry as fun, sad, serious, and mad. He also says poetry is mean, boring, green, and lonely. Here, mean refers unpleasant. There are some poems, those we do not enjoy. Some poetries cross ages and borders. Those are considered as green poetry. Poetry is round means there are a group of events in it. Some poetries are tricky, that means difficult to understand. Picky means fussy and hard to please. Sometimes a poet tries many times to write a perfect poetry. Usually, poets are picky to write a poem. Poetry has a long history. People used to write poetry in the very ancient time. But still, we are getting new poems as there are many poets in the world who are writing new poems. In fact, poetry is all around us. If we have the eyes of a poet, we can see poetry in every object around us. Finally, the poet says, the poetry is for you and you and you. We get enjoyments, thrills, fun from poetry. Some poems give us hope and inspiration, so we can make a list of our favorite poetries and read them in our leisure time. Now let's see a fun poetry. A limerick is fun poetry that consists of 5 lines. Did you read any limerick? Yes, you did. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 1 and down he ran, hickory dickory dock. This is an example of limerick poem. This poem has rhymes in first, second, and fifth lines, and another or different rhymes in third and fourth lines. Poetry is sad. There are many sad poetry in English literature as well as in Bangla literature. In Bangla, Joshimuddin's Kobor poem is very much sad poem. No one can control emotion while reading this poetry. Now let's read a few lines of a sad poem. The Sands of Dee, Charles Kingsley. O Mary, go and call the cattle home, and call the cattle home across the sands of Dee. The western wind was wild and dank with foam, and all alone went she. In this poem, Mary, a little girl, was asked to bring the cattle from the bank of the river Dee. The weather was very rough. The western wind was turbulent and dank with foam. Mary was engulfed with the tide. Later, her dead body was found in the river. Poetry is serious. Now I will read a serious type poem. Dreams. Langston Hughes. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. This is an example of green as well as serious poetry. Langston Hughes, an African American poet, wrote this poem in 1922. In English literature, my favorite poets are Robert Frost, John Keats, and S.T. Coleridge. In Bangla literature, I have many favorite poets. Among them, Kazi Nazrul Islam, Rabindranath Tagore, Jashimuddin, Sufia Kamal, and Michael Madhusudan Datto are mentionable. Dear students, you can make a list of your favorite poets and poetries and read them in this lockdown time. I hope you all enjoyed the class. Thank you very much for joining.